Senator J.D. Vance, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, it's our pleasure. Just let me begin with some of your news. You and a handful of other senators want a different kind of supplemental to fund foreign assistance. You want a standalone for Israel. I believe your number is $14 billion. Can you tell us about this plan? And is this going to entail a fight with Senator McConnell, who wants the big package proposed by Joe Biden?
Well, I don't think it has to entail a fight because the majority of the Republican conference, Larry, would like to separate the packages. Let me just set the table a little bit here. We have $14 billion in a request for Israel. I support it. Probably 99 of my colleagues do support it in the United States Senate. It's virtually unanimous. On the other hand, you have $60 billion for Biden's approach in Ukraine, which I think is not in America's interest. Why not have separate debates? The only way you can do that is to separate the packages. There's another component to this, Larry, which is the political strategy. What Biden is trying to do, knowing that Israel aid is popular, is he's trying to use it as a fig leaf to shove an open borders proposal down our throats. If you look at the border funding of the supplemental, it has nothing to do with border security. You're basically just facilitating the in-migration of illegal migrants and then transporting them all across the country. We're funding it. That's what the supplemental does. Why would we allow Joe Biden to pretend that he's helping Israel when all he's doing is really further opening the American southern border? It's bad politics, it's bad policy, and I think most Republicans won't stand for it.
You know, Senator, just on that, I want to come back to Israel in a second, but just on that border point, which is so important. First of all, it's one of the most important issues right now in the country. In fact, a lot of polls, as you may know, after you get past economy inflation, where Bidenomics is in the mid 20% approval, something like that, you really come to the border. And as I understand, reading some of the stuff published by the White House, it's basically about $1 billion, but it would enhance catch and release, and it would reduce the Border Patrol people to like babysitters and paper pushers. It wouldn't do a single thing to close the border, including, sir, to close the border to people from countries that could be potential terrorists.
Well, that's exactly right, Larry, and I think that polling shows the wisdom of the American people because the border is a huge crisis. You're talking about over 100,000 people dying of fentanyl. But of course, now we're at the biggest risk of a terrorist attack, Larry, that we've had in this country in 20 years. Why? Because many of the people from the terrorist watch list have come across the border already, and many more would like to come. And they know the American southern border is the rapid way to come into it. It's the express ticket into America if you're a terrorist, and everyone knows it. Why would the Republican Senate consent to combining aid to Israel with billions of dollars that will just transport illegal migrants from the southern border to Ohio, to Pennsylvania, to Michigan, all across the country? It doesn't make an ounce of sense, especially when we know that there are members of Hamas trying to get through that border. This is really an insane policy, Larry, and I recognize that a lot of my colleagues would like to support our ally Israel. I think we should support our ally too, but we shouldn't let that support be used as a fig leaf for a bunch of disastrous Biden administration policies.
How fast can you get the Israeli aid done, Senator?
Well, we actually threw it out there last night. It has to lay over in the Senate for about a day. So there is a world where if Democrats don't object to this, we could get this voted on Monday. So this can happen very quickly. But look, we're going to see how many of my colleagues are willing to put their money where their mouth is. If they actually think that there's a bipartisan consensus for supporting Israel, then they should let this through. What I suspect will happen, Larry, is that some Democrats, recognizing they don't want to give away this political leverage, are going to try to force a combined vote on the package. So they will stop us. But look, we're trying to just throw it out there and see what people do. If they actually believe in supporting our allies across the world, this is an opportunity to do it. But I don't think that's what's going on.
You pretty happy with Speaker Mike Johnson, who is on the same page as you on this and probably other issues?
I'm very happy with Speaker Johnson, Larry. You know, a lot of people talk about how this was messy and chaotic. Sometimes democracy is messy and chaotic, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I think this all resulted in a speaker that obviously is a consensus choice, not a single dissenting voice among House Republicans. I'm thrilled we've got a new speaker, and I think our job as a Republican minority in the United States Senate is to not undercut the new speaker. He's got negotiations he's got to do with the President of the United States. He's got his own set of policies that we're going to agree with him on 99% of the time. Let's facilitate the new speaker being successful, not undercut him. And I think dividing these packages is a way to do exactly that.
Let me come back to the war itself, Senator Vance. President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, Kirby, John Kirby, the spokesman, all keep telling us there's no direct Iranian involvement in this barbaric Hamas invasion. Okay, they keep maintaining that. Now, this morning, I'm sure you saw it, front page, Wall Street Journal. The story is essentially 500 terrorists were trained in Iran. Islamic Jihad, Hamas. 500 of them were trained in Iran just weeks before the invasion itself. And this comes after another Wall Street Journal story and a Washington Post story probably several weeks ago now that suggested Iran was working hand in glove with Hamas for the last 2 years, planning and financing this invasion. And I want to read you Israel's top military spokesman. His name is Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. Before the war, I'm going to quote directly, before war, Iran directly assisted Hamas with money, training, weapons, and technological know-how. Now, who is Biden kidding that Iran wasn't directly involved? I ask you, who's he kidding?
Well, I think he's kidding himself, Larry, and we know that Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the entire world. We know they've been directly supportive of Hamas, not just in the last couple of months, but in the last few years. And here's the thing, this is why it's crazy for the Biden administration to hand over billions of dollars to the Iranians, knowing that a big chunk of that is going to be used to state sponsor terrorism. The Biden folks have this line that doesn't make any sense. I know you're a smart guy when it comes to finance, Larry. They say, well, that's $6 billion is not going to be used for terrorism. It's only going to be used for humanitarian assistance. Well, money is fungible. If you give somebody $1 for humanitarian assistance, that frees up resources that they can then go and devote to terrorism. It doesn't pass the smell test. Let's stop funding Iran, especially in a moment when we know they're supporting terrorism, not just against our allies, Larry, but most importantly against us.
So that brings me to my last point. You know, the way to do this right now is to enforce the sanctions, which have gone unenforced for almost 3 years. That includes, by the way, the failure for a snapback of the UN sanctions on deal on ballistic missiles. But look I call it stop a ship. If you want to send a message to Iran, all right, if you want to show some deterrence instead of appeasement, why not abide any Iranian ship carrying a cargo of oil that's going to be sold to China, or maybe drones that might be sold to Russia, or whatever it is. They're not supposed to do that under the sanctions. We had them bankrupted in the Trump years. Now they're flush with $80 billion in oil and foreign exchange reserves. Why not stop a ship, Senator Vance? Why don't you get a bipartisan bill through Congress, through the Senate, or some darn thing to make the Bidens enforce the sanctions? Because we all know that Iran is the master puppeteer here.
Well, Larry, look, you're exactly right. We need to enforce the sanctions, and there are some pieces of legislation working through the Senate and the House, I think, that would do exactly that. By the way, while we're talking about sanctions, Larry, let's not forget that our energy policy is actively enriching the Iranians. If we drilled for more oil, if we refined more oil in our own country, we wouldn't be funding the Iranian state sponsor of terrorism regime. With the one hand, Joe Biden says that he wants to stop the Iranians from sponsoring terrorism. With the other hand, he he pursues an energy policy that makes Americans poorer even as it makes the Iranian mullahs richer doesn't make an ounce of sense. The biggest thing that we could do to cut off Iran's power would be to make ourselves energy dominant. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump needs to become president in 2024, but it's why in the interim we need to promote energy independence in this country and stop Biden's war on American energy. It's not just a war on our consumers, it's a war for America's enemies.
Yes, sir. Senator J.D. Vance, thanks for your time, sir. We appreciate it very much. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Larry. See you.
All right.